Fantastic result, giving children the best chance in life. We want her to bring that same attitude to the Commission and be a loud champion of equality of opportunity, focusing on education, employment and enterprise, levelling up opportunity and unleashing the full potential of our great country.
Robert Barkman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's commitment to tackling disparity in our healthcare, which is particularly important when it comes to maternity care. So can I ask the Minister to speak to her colleagues at the Department for Health and Social Care when it comes to Tameside Hospital, where there is a desperate need for capital funding in a new maternity unit and antenatal clinic. The current unit is located at Charlesworth House, first built in 1971. It's poorly insulated, sensitive clinical equipment often overheats, and capital funding bid badly needs support. I hope she can work with me on this to deliver better healthcare for the women of the High Peak.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maternity care is a top priority for this government, and we are making progress. Since 2010, we've seen a 25% reduction in stillbirths and a 29% reduction in neonatal maternity mortality. In terms of a new maternity unit at Tameside, I understand the Acorn Birth Centre opened last year and has been well received locally, but I'm happy to discuss further improvements with my honourable friend.
Shadow Secretary Annalise Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, we learned that domestic abuse-related crimes have doubled in the last 5 years, but the number of prosecutions has fallen every year in the same period. A few minutes ago, the Foreign Secretary rightly lamented violence against women and girls across the world. When will she get a grip on the catastrophic situation facing many women and girls in our own country?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government was the first government to pass the landmark domestic abuse bill to set out for the first time on the statute book protections for women and girls and other victims of domestic abuse. This is a sweeping piece of legislation, and when we are working at pace to drive actions to increase prosecutions across the entire criminal justice system, backed up by a significant investment in our courts to address the backlog.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regret the Minister does not appear to have seen the figures from this morning. If she had, she would know her government's measures are not working. I thought she would mention additional measures that are required, increasing sentences for stalking and domestic murder, introducing new defences for victims, stopping the social security, family courts and migration systems from failing victims, and making serial abusers subject to special supervision. Labour's called for all of these measures. When will the Conservatives enact them?
Minister.
I can tell the Honourable Lady that the Conservatives are already enacting the vast majority of that long list she's just recited. We are, as I said, we are the first government to put domestic abuse on the statute book, and I would invite her to attend Home Office questions and address the Home Secretary directly to hear about the vast amount of measures that we are doing to protect women and girls in this country, which is a personal priority of the Prime Minister.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree that improving trust in and legitimacy of key public officials and institutions in areas like law enforcement, immigration and health, particularly amongst communities where it has historically been low, is absolutely essential? And what steps does she intend to take to level up in this vital area?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, building trust between different communities and the institutions that serve them was a central theme of the report by the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. We will respond to the report shortly, setting out our plans for building back fairer, and I can assure my honourable friend that his concerns will be at the heart of our response.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between March and June this year, self-harm for women in prisons grew by a staggering 47%. Is the Minister aware that the best health outcomes for women with children is not incarceration in prison, but a sentence in the community? Can the Minister say how they are pursuing this with the Secretary of State for Justice?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that very important point. I don't have the Ministry of Justice's figures to hand, but what I can do is get one of my colleagues in that department to write to her with a more specific and comprehensive answer to her question.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree that it's time to better protect women from abuse and harassment, and the vehicle to do this is the online safety bill?
Minister.
So I fully agree with my honourable friend. No one should feel afraid to participate in our democracy. Intimidation in public life can stop talented people, such as my honourable friend, and others from minority backgrounds, from standing for public office.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to inequalities, young carers very often lose out. I wonder if I could invite the government to come and look at a wonderful organisation in Wick called Clicks, who really are delivering a service that means a huge amount to young people.
Sir State.
Well, I'm sure we'd be very keen to do that.
Better.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dame Laura Cox recently argued that the macho behaviour and posturing so frequently displayed in our political debates have disproportionately and adversely affected women in public life. Not just politicians, but women journalists, academics, campaigners and political activists who have all reported instances of intimidation, abuse and even physical violence. What does the Minister believe we can do collectively to change this culture?
Anybody want it? Sigridale.
Well, the honourable lady is right. We do need to deal with the culture in our politics, and we need to make sure that we are having rational, reasonable debates, and I think we're demonstrating that today.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I don't think we need any more. If you listen to this next bit, it might help. I wish to make one further point. There are many reflections on Sir David Amess's decency and kindness at a very moving Requiem Mass held yesterday. I sincerely hope that those qualities of kindness, decency, are reflected in our proceedings today and in the future. I now call the Prime Minister. Chris Bryant, number one.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Thank you. Thank you very much. Immediately following PMQs, I will attend the Welcome Home march-in to thank all those involved in pitting our evacuation from Kabul. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Chris Bryant.
I too will be attending I too will be attending in a few minutes. Nicky's 7-year-old son had 37 seizures a day because of a brain disease he suffered from. He's had surgery now, but it's a struggle every day to get him to stay in school. Nicky, is supporting the acquired brain injury bill because she believes that the government needs to have a cross-departmental strategy for supporting those who've had an acquired brain injury, whether that's rugby players with concussion and dementia, it's women who've been beaten in the head by their partners. It's people who've had brain injuries due to children who've had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning, soldiers who've been in explosions. I really hope that the government is going to back the acquired brain injury bill. But above all, we need a strategy to help the 1.4 million people in this country. Will he give us that?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank the Right Honourable Member for raising this vital issue and for his commitment to this cause, his personal commitment. And I can assure him that we are studying his proposed bill and working to ensure that people do get the support for the acquired brain injuries that they have received. And what we can certainly pledge at this stage to do, and I hope this will be of some use to him and the many who care about this issue in the way that he does, and as I'm sure members do across the House, the Department of Health and Social Care will lead on the development of a cross-departmental government strategy on acquired brain injury and other neurological conditions. I'll be very happy to share details with him shortly.
Felicity Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July of this year, my constituency, Kensington, suffered devastating flooding, with more than 2,000 homes flooded, a river running down Portobello Road, and a lot of residents having to move into temporary accommodation. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that Thames Water needs to come up with short and long-term solutions, and they need to make sufficient investment in infrastructure to prevent events like this happening again?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise flooding, Mr. Speaker, and she's right about short and long-term solutions, and that's why I'm proud, amongst other things, to have helped instigate the Thames Tideway Tunnel, with the biggest super sewer in the history of this country, which will help to deal with what happens in London when the Basingstoke interceptors overflow, and to deal with flooding throughout the city.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the last election, the Prime Minister promised that nobody would have to sell their home to pay for care. That's another broken promise, isn't it?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. Because if he looked at what we are proposing, and if he supported what we are proposing, which is fixing something that Labour never fixed in all their years in office, Mr. Speaker, we are saying to the people of this country that we will disregard your home as part of your assets if you and your spouse are living in it. And number two, Mr. Speaker, you can have a deferred payments agreement if you move out of it and you're living in residential care. You can have a deferred payments agreement. But most important of all, Mr. Speaker, by putting the huge investment that we are making now in health and social care, we are allowing for the first time the people of this country to insure themselves against the potentially catastrophic, the otherwise catastrophic costs of dementia or Alzheimer's, Mr. Speaker. And even if you're not one of those people who suffer from those afflictions, we are taking away the anxiety from millions of people up and down the land about their homes.
Keir Starmer.
I think the Prime Minister just described the broken system he said he was fixing. So it's certainly not a straight answer. Let's have another go. Let's have another go. I see they turned up this week, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, he used to say that...
Sorry. I don't think I need any further. Yesterday we had a very good example of the house being at its best in that church, in that cathedral. Please, let's show some respect. I want to be able to hear not only the Prime Minister but the Leader of the Opposition. Shouting each other down doesn't do you or your constituents any good. We need to hear the questions, and I certainly need to hear the answers. And if anybody doesn't like it, please leave now. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's not a complicated question, so let's have another go. He used to say that nobody would have to sell their home to pay for their care. It's in his manifesto right here. On the basis of that promise, he then put up tax on every working person in the country. So has he done what he promised and ensured that nobody will have to sell their home to pay for care? Yes or no? It's not complicated.
Prime Minister.
No, it's not complicated, Mr. Speaker, because what we're doing is disregarding your home as part of the assets that we calculate. So if you go down to £100,000, that's the beginning where we will ask you to contribute. But your home is not included in that, Mr. Speaker. And they have absolutely no plan. They've spent decades failing to address this. And only a few weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, they failed to vote for the £36 billion that will enable us to fix this and to help people up and down the country, not just to fix the social care problem, but to pay for people to live in their own homes, Mr. Speaker, and receive the care they need in their homes. That's what this One Nation Conservative government is doing. Why won't it support it?
Mr. Speaker has had two opportunities to stand by his manifesto commitment and he's not taken them. Well, it says he just has. So let's test this in the real world, Prime Minister. Under the Prime Minister's plans, a person with assets worth about £100,000, most of it tied up in their home, would have to pay £80,000. They'd lose almost everything. How on earth does the Prime Minister think that they can get their hands on that kind of money without selling their home?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have a third go at trying to clear this up in the befuddled mind of the right honourable gentleman opposite, because it is important, and the fact is that the party opposite have totally failed to address it. They haven't had the guts to fix this in all their time in office. It's something left over. It's something left over from the Attlee government, and we are fixing it. And let me repeat for the third time, Mr. Speaker, since your home is disregarded. Number two, even if you have a second home in your residential care, Mr. Speaker, you have a deferred payments agreement if you want. And number three, Mr. Speaker, we are allowing you to insure yourself for the first time against the catastrophic consequence by capping it at 86,000, Mr. Speaker. And now he stood on a manifesto to put the cap where, Mr. Speaker? At £100,000, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
The question was very simple, and it's the question all of his backbenchers answered. If you've got a house worth about £120,000, £140,000, how do you find £80,000+ without selling your home? It's common sense. Strip away the bluster, strip away the deflection, strip away the refusal to answer the question. There's a simple truth, and this is why the Prime Minister won't address it. People will still be forced to sell their homes to pay for care. That accounts... Why did they... Look at the vote the other day to see the answer to that question. They'll still be forced to sell their home. It's another broken promise. Just like he promised that he wouldn't put up tax. Just like he promised 40 new hospitals. Just like he promised a rail revolution in the north. Mr. Speaker, who knows if he'll make it to the next election? But if he does, how does he expect anyone to take him and his promises seriously?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yet again he raises the rail revolution in the north. And the 3 new high-speed lines, Mr. Speaker, 96 billion pounds. Nothing like it. Again, nothing like it, Mr. Speaker. Nothing like it for a century. And just for the advantage of what I didn't even know this. I was in a state of complete innocence about this last week, Mr. Speaker. But it turns out that the right honourable gentleman actually campaigned against HS2 altogether. Said it would be devastating and said it should be cancelled. I can tell you something, Mr. Speaker. HS2 runs through my constituency as well. And I took a decision, even though it's been very tough for my constituents, I took a decision that it was the right thing to do for the long-term interests of the whole country. How can they possibly trust that man?
Mr. Speaker, I think he's lost his place in his notes again. The only thing he's delivering is high taxes, high prices and low growth. I'm not sure the Prime Minister should be shouting about that. And it isn't just broken promises, it's also about fairness. Everyone needs protection against massive health and care costs. But under his plans, someone with assets worth about £100,000 will lose almost everything. Yet somebody with assets of about £1 million will keep almost everything. It's just like their 2017 manifesto all over again. Only this time, something has changed. He's picked the pockets of working people to protect the estates of the wealthiest. How could he possibly have managed to devise a working-class dementia tax?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered that question 3 times already. This does more for working people up and down the country than Labour ever did. than Labour ever did, because we're actually solving the problem that they failed to address. We're disregarding your housing asset altogether, Mr. Speaker, while you're in it. And he talks about jobs, he talks about working people. Well, let me just remind him. There's just one key statistic that people should bear in mind. It's now almost a month after furlough ended. He talks about the economy, Mr. Speaker. There are now more people in work than there were before the pandemic began. And that's because of the policies this government has pursued.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, there's no getting away from it. Working people are being asked to pay twice. During their working lives, they'll pay much more tax in national insurance, whilst those living off wealth are protected. And then when they retire, Mr. Speaker, they face having to sell their home when the wealthiest won't have to do so. It's a classic con game, a Covent Garden pickpocketing operation. The Prime Minister's the front man, distracting people with wild promises and panto speeches, whilst his Chancellor dips his hand in their pocket. But now the Prime Minister's routine is falling flat. His Chancellor is worried that people are getting wise. His backbenchers say it's embarrassing. Your words. Your words. And senior people in Downing Street tell the BBC it's just not working. Is everything okay, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I tell you what's not working. It's that line of attack. Because I just want to repeat. I want to repeat the crucial point, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering for the working people of this country. We're delivering for the people of this country, and we're fixing the problems that they thought could never be fixed. We're doing the things that they thought were impossible. And let me repeat: there are now more people in work in this country, jobs up, with their wages going up, Mr. Speaker, than there were before the pandemic began. And that is because of the policies that this government has followed. Whether it's on rolling out the vaccine, if you remember that he opposed, whether it's on investment that he opposed. He did, Mr. Speaker. He didn't want to invest in the vaccine task force. I seem to remember. Or whether it is making the strategic investments that we have. If we listened to Captain Hindsight, Mr. Speaker, we would have no HS2 at all, because that was what he stood for. And if we listened to him, we would all still be in lockdown, Mr. Speaker.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that he will use the rest of the UK's presidency of COP to urge countries around the world to make good on the pledges that they made in Glasgow? And does he agree with me that decarbonisation can create millions of jobs across the UK and around the world?
Prime Minister.
I totally agree with my right honourable friend who's right about this and many other things. And that's why our transition to green jobs is supporting 440,000 new green high-wage, high-skilled jobs across the UK. And the breakthrough agenda that we had endorsed at COP26, I believe, will support between 20 and 30 million jobs across the world by 2030. And I think that's probably a gross underestimate.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you will wish to join me and indeed the rest of the House in welcoming the moderator of the Church of Scotland to the gallery today, Lord Wallace, and to thank him for his sage words at his sermon this morning. Mr. Speaker, the past few weeks have shown this Tory government at its very worst. A Tory sleaze and corruption scandal on a scale not seen since the 1990s. Tory cuts and tax rises that will leave millions of people worse off. A litany of broken promises, from HS2 to carbon capture, social care, the triple lock on pensions. And who can possibly forget the £20 billion bridge to Ireland that evaporated into thin air? At the centre of all this is one man, a Prime Minister who is floundering in failure. So, can I ask the Prime Minister, with his party falling in the polls, his colleagues briefing against him, has he considered calling it a day before he's pushed out the door?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I think what the people of this country want to hear is less talk about politics and politics, and they want to talk about what the government is doing for the people of Scotland. And what the Scottish government is doing for the people of Scotland, which isn't enough, Mr. Speaker. But what we will do, he talks about infrastructure investment, and I can tell him that if he will wait till I think till Friday or later this week, he's going to hear about what we're going to do with the Union Connectivity Review to ensure that the people of Scotland are served with the connections that they need, and which the Scottish Nationalist Party has totally failed to put in.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That certainly wasn't an answer to the question I asked, but we're used to that. And I didn't expect the Prime Minister to take responsibility, because he never does. But this isn't just about the chaos in the Conservative Party. It's about the state of the United Kingdom under his failing leadership. Because whilst the Prime Minister spends his time hunting for chatty pigs and staving off a leadership challenge from the Treasury, in the real world, Mr. Speaker, people are suffering a Tory cost of living crisis. Brexit is hitting the economy hard, but the Prime Minister can't even give a coherent speech to business. The Prime Minister's officials have lost confidence in him. Tory MPs have lost confidence in him. The letters are going in, and the public have lost confidence in him. Why is he clinging on when quite clearly he simply isn't up to the job?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I might ask the right honourable gentleman what on earth he thinks he is doing, talking about party political issues, when what the people of Scotland want to hear is what on earth the Scottish National Government is doing. They're falling in the polls, Mr. Speaker. Their cause, yes they are, their cause is falling in the polls, and considering their manifold failures on tax, on education, and all the things the people of Scotland really care about, I'm not surprised, and I can see some agreement on the benches opposite.
Jonathan Lord. Mr. Speaker, I celebrate the recent successes of Woking College, my local sixth form college, and I welcome the recent government investment for a new teaching block, which will allow it to expand. Many colleges and students find BTECs to be a really valuable qualification and course, enabling progress into higher education and skilled employment. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we should protect student choice and keep BTECs as an option for students?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we will continue. I thank my honourable friend. We will continue to fund some BTECs where there's a clear need for them. But I must stress to him that we've got to close the gap between the things that people study and the needs of business and employers, and that's what T-levels are designed to do.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rarely agree with the Prime Minister, but last week, when he said that COP26 showed that we can end our reliance on fossil fuels, I did agree with him. But that begs the question as to why his government is pressing ahead not just with the Cambo oil field, but with 39 other oil, gas and coal developments, which would amount to 3 times the UK's current annual climate emissions. Now, I don't want an answer about all the things he thinks he is doing on cars and cash and trees. I want him to tell the House if he will leave those fossil fuels in the ground, will he cancel those projects? And does he recognise that if he doesn't, he will need to ask for forgiveness, not just for losing his place in a speech, but for losing the future of our children?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are not only powering past coal, going to an end to fossil fuel reliance in our energy generation at all by 2024, which is an absolutely stunning thing ahead of countries around the world. I'm glad that she's praising me for that. The Cambo oil field, as she knows, is for study by an independent regulator. But what we have also done, and led the world in this, Mr. Speaker, is stopped the financing of overseas hydrocarbons. And that is a fantastic thing which the whole world followed.
Dr. Andrew Murris.
Mr. Speaker, net zero, levelling up and building back better can't happen unless we have a massive increase in the supply of critical tech minerals like silicon, copper and lithium, but Beijing controls most of them. Noting China's recent tech minerals leverage on Japan, does he agree with me that the success of our green industrial revolution hinges on advancing our indigenous Silicon Valley? And free of the EU, what fiscal incentives can he now provide to make it happen at pace?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that. And as he knows, there are some very, very interesting and potentially very lucrative sources of minerals such as lithium in this country, whose exploration, discovery and reuse we are encouraging. But secondly, on the tax point that he rightly raises, we're going to use free ports to ensure that we support them as hubs for the processing of those critical minerals here in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, my constituent's 3-year-old son, Freddie Hussey, was killed by an unsafe trailer. Every year, 30% of people who do the B+E test fail it. And now the government is abolishing that test, unleashing thousands of untrained, untested, unsafe drivers onto our roads. Why is the government breaking its promise to grieving families to make towing and our roads safer?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
I thank her very much for raising this with me, and I'm very sorry to hear about the tragic circumstances of Freddie's death. And what we want to do is to free up B&E licensing time so that we get more people qualified as HGV drivers. But that cannot compromise road safety, as she rightly says. So we will review the legislation and its consequences at regular intervals.
Thank you, Speaker. On the 2nd to 5th of December, Lincoln will be hosting its world-famous Christmas market in the grounds of the historic Lincoln Castle. And it would be remiss of me not to invite my honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and yourself, Speaker, and all other colleagues, even the opposition front bench, to come and enjoy the marvellous long weekend of festivities. However, what is less than marvellous for my constituents is the levelling down of Lincolnshire's highway maintenance grant by 25% on 2019 to 2020 levels. Can my honourable friend use his influence to cause the Treasury and DfT to revisit this unfortunate decision? Restoring this grant back to 1920 levels is imperative to the safety of my constituents, whether in vehicles, cycling or walking, as I would hope my right honourable friend would agree.
Minister.
Well, I thank you very much for this question. I'll do my utmost, as I'm sure all other. He's invited everybody. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to be going to Lincoln, I hope. But I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, would have listened very carefully to what he had to say.
Hannah Baldwin.
Inexplicable, Mr. Speaker, is how former Vaccine Task Force Chair Kate Bingham described his government's decision to cancel its contract with Livingston-based vaccine developer Valneva, a company the Prime Minister has himself visited. She also noted how shoddily Valneva have been treated and how damaging his government's decision has been for UK life sciences, exports and for jobs in my Livingston constituency, where a state-of-the-art vaccine manufacturing plant now lies unfinished. There has been no apology to the incorrect statements in the House, so can the Prime Minister please meet with me and representatives from Valneva, and will he tell me whether his government has tabled any proposals to reach an amicable resolution which was promised at the dispatch box, and if not, when will he do so?
Minister.
Yes, I thank her very much. And I was personally very disappointed when we couldn't get approval for the Valneva vaccine in the way that we had hoped, and I know how disappointing that was to colleagues in Scotland. I will certainly make sure that she gets the relevant meeting. But what we are doing is investing massively in this country's vaccine capability across the country, so that we are prepared for the next pandemic. And I very much hope that Valneva will be part of that.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you. We know that serious side effects from the COVID vaccines are very rare, but for my constituent Sarah Kite that wasn't the case, and she suffered a very serious reaction, leaving her in constant pain and losing most of her eyesight, and she now can't work. The Prime Minister successfully and quite rightly speeded up all the vaccine processes except one, the vaccine damage payment system. Can we now get on with making those payments so people who have suffered these very, very serious reactions can get the financial support they need?
Prime Minister.
Yes. I thank him very much, and I just want to reassure him and indeed to reassure the House and the country that cases such as the very sad one that he raises are extremely, extremely rare, and we're putting more money in to gather evidence for claims such as the one that he describes. But I want to repeat perhaps the most important message I can get across again today, Mr. Speaker. I want to repeat how vital that vaccination programme is, how safe it is, and how important it is that everybody who is eligible gets their booster when they're called.
Matthew Pennington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's integrated review concluded that the Chinese state poses a systemic challenge to our national security, and the Prime Minister has made clear that when it comes to China, we must remain vigilant about our critical national infrastructure. Can he therefore confirm today, unequivocally, that plans for China General Nuclear to own and operate its own plant in Bradwell in Essex have been abandoned, and explain to the House precisely how and when his government intends to remove CGN's interest from the Sizewell C nuclear project?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much for his question, a very important issue that he raises, and clearly one of the consequences of our approach on critical national infrastructure, the National Security and Investment Bill, is that we don't want to see undue influence by potentially adversarial countries in our critical national infrastructure, and so that's why we've taken the decisions that we have. And on Bradwell, there will be more information forthcoming. But what I don't want to do, Mr. Speaker, is pitchfork away wantonly all Chinese investment in this country, or minimise the importance of this country of having a trading relationship with China.
Daniel Kuczynski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be very pleased that Shrewsbury Conservatives are doing everything possible to help Neil Shastri Hurst, the excellent candidate in North Shropshire. But he will also know that the #1 issue affecting Salopians at the moment is the £312 million that we've secured for a modernisation of our A&E services. This has suffered terrible delays over the last 8 years, leading to a worsening of our A&E services for local patients. Will he do everything possible to help us get this finally across the line so that we can provide safe A&E services for all the people of Shropshire and Mid Wales?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and that's one of the reasons why we're investing £36 billion more in our NHS now to help cope with the backlog, the extra winter pressures, particularly on A&E. But it's also a reason why the booster programme is so vital, because we don't want those beds filled with COVID patients, and we don't want delayed discharges either.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So far, his government have found billions for nuclear, but nothing for the Scottish carbon capture cluster, nothing for pump storage hydro, and now are at risk of failing the tidal stream generation, a technology Scotland's a world leader in. Now, the ask is for a £71 million ring-fenced marine pot in next month's energy auction. So the Prime Minister's got a choice: provide this money and allow continued scale-up and commercial success based on a UK supply chain, or see the manufacturing jobs move abroad. What's it going to be?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad he asked that question, because I can tell him, and I can tell his right honourable friend, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, that we will be including a support for tidal stream. For tidal stream in the upcoming to the value of £20 million. Come on. Not to be sneezed at. Not to be sneezed at, Mr. Speaker. In the upcoming Contract for Difference auction, I've met representatives of Scottish Tidal Power. I think it's fantastic, original, inventive what they're doing. We want to support it.
Sir David Evelyn.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, I've been out campaigning with our excellent candidate in Bexley, Sidcup, Louis French, for the by-election, and responses on the doorstep are very good. The opposition know nothing as usual. Can my right honourable friend confirm that he will continue to implement our 2019 manifesto and implement policies to ensure that we build up better for the whole country, including London, because this is what the electors in Bexley want.
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can, and I have happy memories over many years of campaigning with my honourable friend in Bexley and Sidcup. And I can tell him that we are delivering on our agenda for the people of London, putting 20,000 more police out on the street and making sure that they get to outer London boroughs as well, and making sure that Londoners do not suffer from the crazed outer London tax that would see motorists penalised by the Labour mayor for driving into their own city.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cherwell Larder in Kidlington does incredible work serving nearly 2,000 of my most vulnerable constituents, but at the moment there simply isn't enough food to go around. And this is a national crisis. Stock for charities like Fair Share is down 30%, in part due to the same supply chain issues that are affecting supermarkets. So will the Prime Minister help the Cherwell Larder, firstly by restoring the funding to Fair Share, but also what more can he do to incentivise businesses to give away surplus food this winter so that no family need go hungry this Christmas?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank her for raising Fair Share and what they're doing to support people this winter and indeed at all times. But I would also say that my experience of business is that they do an amazing job of contributing to this effort. Iceland is one of the companies that springs to mind. But on the supply chains, we are addressing it night and day, and we are seeing some of the problems starting to ease. They are the result, Mr. Speaker, of the British and the world economy coming back into life, which, quite frankly, would not have happened if we listened to the gentleman opposite. I just remind you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was bang on Monday when he spoke about ending the unfairness of our high energy-intensive industries paying more than they pay overseas. So we know he is a friend to steel in Scunthorpe. So will he continue to do all that he can to ensure that my world-class steelmakers are on a fair footing?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend and everything she does for steel and for Scunthorpe, and I can tell her that I do believe that British Steel has suffered as a result of decisions taken years and years ago from unfair energy costs. We need to fix it, and this government is getting on and making another of the long-term changes we're instituting, Mr. Speaker. We're putting in the nuclear baseload that this country has long been deprived of.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be introducing a bill to ban the import of hunting trophies. Not only does that have widespread public support and support from opposition parties, but in the past the principle has been supported by Conservative manifestos, the Queen's Speech, and indeed by yourself. So, Prime Minister, on Friday the 10th of December, will you tell your whips not to block the bill, but to let it go forward so we can work together and end this vile trade as soon as possible?
The honourable gentleman is completely right, and that's why we're going to introduce legislation this Parliament to ban the import of hunting trophies and delivering the change that we promised, and I hope that he will support it.
Sir Mike Penning.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister cheered all of my constituents up when he came to South West Hertfordshire and said we were going to have a new hospital. Sadly, Prime Minister, even though the money's there, the local management of our trust have blocked it. They're going to refurbish Watford and not give us a brand new hospital on a greenfield site, which is what we want. Prime Minister, will you meet me and some of my constituents to unblock this and tell the NHS they need to build a new hospital for Hemel Hempstead?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to my friend. I do remember the issue being raised with me when I was with him. I'll be very happy to secure a meeting with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, and I'm sure we'll be able to unblock things one way or the other.
John Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scots stood slack-jawed this week with astonishment at the news that the Prime Minister has abandoned his DUP bridge to Northern Ireland. Perhaps he'll offer hot air balloons for the crossing instead and inflate them himself. Broken bridge promises to Scotland, broken rail promises to Northern England. With buyer's remorse consuming the Tory backbenchers, who does he think will be defenestrated first? His hapless Tory leader in Scotland or himself?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind the Scottish Nationalist Party that they are there to represent the people of Scotland and to deliver better services, better transport, better healthcare, and what we are delivering. He talks about transport, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell him what I said to the leader of the SNP in Westminster. What we are delivering is the first thoroughgoing review of union connectivity, so that we look properly at all those roads, the A75, the A77, the A1, all those vital connections for the people of Scotland that have been neglected by the SNP, that this government is going to fix.
Final question, Miriam Kate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm absolutely delighted with the £500 million Start for Life funding that was announced in the budget. And my right honourable friend knows from personal experience how important those early years are, whether that's parenting advice, access to healthcare or age-appropriate theme parks. So does he agree that rolling out family hubs to 75 local authority areas is a great start? But can he confirm that if this is a successful programme, the government's aim is to roll it out across the whole country?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much, and she's totally right in what she says about Start for Life. And I'm just seeing if my right honourable friend is still in her place, which she's vanished. But I want to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Northampton, because she has championed this for many, many years. She is right. Mr. Speaker, investment in kids' early years is absolutely crucial. That's why this government has begun Start for Life. And yes, if it works, Mr. Speaker, we will roll it out across the country.
We're now going to come to the urgent questions. For those who need to leave, please do so. You're right. Too lively. I know. You're right. See you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
No problem. Look after yourselves. Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm always nice. We now come to the urgent question. I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if you will make a statement on bulb energy entering administration.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As many people in the House will know, when energy suppliers leave the market, the regulator Ofgem runs a competitive supplier of last resource process. Last week, Bulb informed the government and Ofgem that they would be leaving the market. Ofgem has advised that the supply of last resort process is not viable for Bulb because of the size of its customer book. Ofgem has, with my consent, applied to the court to appoint energy administrators. If appointed by the court, the administrators will continue operating Bulb under what is called the special administration regime set out clearly in legislation. We will update the House once the court has made its determination, but I want to clarify a couple of points. Firstly, a special administration regime is a temporary arrangement which provides an ultimate safety net to protect consumers and ensure continued supply. The special administration regime will keep bills at the lowest cost, which is reasonably practical to incur, whilst ensuring that the market remains stable. The House should understand that we do not want this company to be in this temporary state longer than is absolutely necessary. Supplies remain secure and credit balances will be protected. And finally, all domestic customers in Great Britain, of course, are protected by the energy price cap, which remains firmly in place.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, it's right the Business Secretary has been forced to the House to make this statement. 18 companies have gone bust since the last time he came to the House in September on this issue and reassured us there was nothing to worry about. I've got a series of questions. First, can he tell us his estimate of the scale of cost the taxpayer is facing from the Bulb bailout? It wasn't clear from his statement. This is a taxpayer bailout and the public deserve to know. Next, can he level with people about the costs that bill payers are going to have to pick up from all the other companies that have failed since September? How much will bills increase as a result? The second set of issues, we're now in a position where companies have banked profits, but losses stretching to hundreds of millions incurred by those same companies are being borne by taxpayers and bill payers. Now, with so many companies going bust in just 2 months, something not happening anywhere else in the world, it points to a systemic failure of regulation. Firms took risky bets and were allowed to do so, and the government and Ofgem significantly deregulated the conditions of operation in 2016. Will the Business Secretary now take responsibility for the clear failure of regulation there has been, and doesn't it suggest there needs to be a proper external review of the regulation of the market? Third, there's a global dimension to gas price rises, but the truth is we are more exposed as a country because of failures on onshore wind, solar and energy efficiency and gas storage, which is just 2% of our annual demand compared to 25% in other countries. Will he admit that government inaction over the last decade has left us more vulnerable? Finally, on the cost of living crisis, with further energy price rises coming, why is the government making the situation worse with cuts to universal credit, raising national insurance and refusing to bring some relief by cutting VAT on energy bills? And with businesses being hit too, where is the support he indicated was coming more than a month ago for energy-intensive industries? Mr. Speaker, we've seen a failure of policy over a decade, a failure of regulation, the government making the cost of living crisis worse. Isn't the truth this government cannot be the answer to this energy crisis because it is their crisis and it is businesses and families who are paying the price?
So just as a point of fact, the number is actually 22 companies, not 18. And I refer back to that. No, that's the figure. And actually that shows the incredible resilience of the systems that we have in place. We've got the supplier of last resort, which has worked very effectively. And as I outlined in my initial statement, we also have the special administrative regime, which was designed precisely to deal with the situation that we are now in. In terms of regulation, Ofgem have launched a review looking at the retail market and how it operates, and that's something which I will be studying very closely and directly involved with. And of course, in terms of the global situation, he talks about the global market and the situation we're in post-COVID. He was and his party were predicting record levels of unemployment. They were predicting recession. And of course, they were completely wrong. They were absolutely wrong. We are growing the economy stronger than any other country in the G7. We're also creating jobs. We're creating investment. And so his prophecies of doom were completely misplaced. And he is completely without any firm arguments as to our response to what was a global pandemic.
Sir John Redden.
What action has the Secretary of State taken to ensure that in future there would be more UK domestic gas to replace unreliable and expensive imported? And what action is he taking to expand the capacity of our generating system for days when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
The right honourable gentleman, my right honourable friend, will know that this is the first government in about 25 years or more which is firmly committed to nuclear power. Now, he will understand that the capital expenditure, the long-term commitment to nuclear power is something that won't necessarily bear fruit in a week or a month. But he will understand that we, for the first time, have made a very dramatic 100% commitment to increasing our nuclear capacity. So that answers his point about the overall security of supply. In terms of gas, I'm very pleased to announce that I and my right honourable friend are driving the North Sea transition deal. And the key to that is it's about transition. It's about trying to transition to net zero while securing jobs and securing security of supply from gas in the UK continental shelf. So these things are things that we're very apprised of.
Alan Brown.
Alan Brown. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2018, there were over 70 companies in the energy retail sector, but now there's less than 30, a reduction of 60%. And Bulb is actually the 23rd company since August of this year to go bust. A stat somehow the Secretary of State seemed happy at the dispatch box earlier on about. So when is this government going to get a grip of what is now a cost of living crisis and the energy supply crisis? As energy bills soar, the Treasury actually gets extra VAT, the Treasury gets extra income and fuel duty, and on top of the £350 billion worth of oil and gas revenues from Scotland has already been squandered, this year alone, because gas prices have increased, the Treasury's got an extra £1.1 billion more than they predicted. So when are they going to reinvest some of this money to support consumers and actually support the sector? Bulb was the 7th largest company and has 1.7 million customers. So what is the plan for coming out of the special administration? Because the Secretary of State still didn't tell us that. And particularly when EDF, Scottish Power, Octopus, Utilita and Good Energy all say they can't afford new customers, what is going to happen with these customers, and can the energy companies actually refuse to take new customers, and what discussions the Secretary of State having with these other customers. Now, he says that the energy cap's here to stay, but what's actually going to be affecting consumers and fuel poverty when the cap is invariably going to go up by £400 to £600 in April? It's a disgrace. They've allocated £1.7 billion of taxpayers' money to develop sizable C to final investment stage. Why not invest that money in energy efficiency and renewable energy and do stuff that actually bring energy bills down, rather than committing to consumers to a £10 to £15 contract for nuclear and then 6 years on top of that? When are they going to get a grip of energy policy as a whole?
So this is where the right honourable gentleman and I disagree. We are firmly committed to nuclear power. He is against it. He is against it. And we can do two things. We can commit to renewables, as we're doing with our 10-point plan, our commitment to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind. I would hope that he recognised that we're committed to tidal for the first time in many decades. That was something that he would appreciate. He should also remember that we have the warm home discounts and lots of mitigations protecting the most vulnerable customers across the winter and in the next few months.
John Penrose.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to making sure that this temporary measure is indeed temporary, and can I encourage him to make it as short as possible, as well as welcoming his commitment to the ongoing use of the price cap. But can I also urge him, when the price cap legislation comes up for renewal in the course of the next 12 months, to think very carefully about reform of that price cap in order to make it much more fit for purpose. At the moment, it isn't doing what we need. We have these companies going bust, and we also have an ongoing problem with the loyalty penalty, which was, after all, one of the key reasons for introducing it in the first place.
He will appreciate, as I alluded to in my statement, that Ofgem have already launched a consultation on precisely this issue of the retail price cap, and that's something which they will be driving forward, and I'm sure his input will be very welcome in the consultation. I also feel that we have had lots of mitigations in terms of protecting the most vulnerable consumers, but clearly the retail market is something that we need to have a discussion about. Ofgem are leading that. My department is also supporting a closer look at the retail market.
Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State mentioned the particular arrangements for bulk customers, but constituents who've been moved from other energy suppliers who have collapsed, there were 21 to date when I mentioned this at business questions last week, are now facing long delays being set up with suppliers of last resort. So they don't know what their bills are going to be, they face accumulating debt, and they may miss out on the warm home discount. So what's the government doing to address that?
Hear, hear.
Well, be very happy to talk to the Honourable Lady about specifics in her constituency. Generally, I have to say that the supply of last resort process is working. It was set up precisely for this process, and it is working, and customers have been transferred successfully to new suppliers.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome my right honourable friend's attention to detail on this. And clearly, one of the problems here is that gas prices have dramatically increased across the world. So we have to cope with that. So can I ask him, what is he doing to make sure we increase the supply of gas to ensure that actually the market then reduces the overall prices?
So one of the things you should understand that we have a security of supply. So if you take 2020, if my honourable friend takes 2020, 50% of the gas was UK continental shelf, 30% was coming from Norway, 18% was essentially shipped, and 2% came from interconnectors. That is a diversity of supply and a security of supply that other countries, frankly, in the EU and on the continent don't have. He will also appreciate the fact that the supply of last resort process and the energy price cap have protected consumers very considerably through this difficult period.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of my constituents have been in touch with me over the last few months as their energy supplies collapsed, and the Secretary of State said 22 now have collapsed. But we're moving back to an oligarchy of energy companies who are increasing their profits whilst the supplier of last resort is socialising losses. What's he going to do to fix the broken energy market? This winter, we're going to have a perfect storm of rising wholesale prices and collapsing companies. How is he going to resolve that so people don't end up in fuel poverty?
I don't agree with the honourable gentleman's characterisation. I don't think we're going back to an oligopoly, as he said. I've always maintained that competition is absolutely essential in this market. What's happened, as my honourable friend alluded to, is there's been a huge mismatch between the wholesale price and the retail price cap. And the retail price cap is there to protect consumers, because otherwise we would have seen a huge increase in consumer prices and his constituents would have been under even more pressure.
Craig McKinley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been on something of an energy nomadic experience over the last few months. I started with Avro Energy a few months ago, but that went bankrupt and I got converted domestically into Bulb. And I'm now in the support scheme within the space of 3 months. We've had a 12% energy price rise at the last round in August, and who knows what it will be in April next year. The policy of trying to sell tenpences for sixpence does not last for very long. And what we're going to see over this winter is the Treasury, i.e. the taxpayer, making up the difference for these spot prices versus the reality of what it's been sold for to domestic users. Can my right honourable friend please see the vision that the only bridging energy supply, of which we have a lot of domestically, is gas? Yes. We all want net zero sometime, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to take a generation to get there. We have a domestic supply that can bring us the two key planks of energy. That is security of supply and affordability, and our domestic users and industry needs that immediately.
Just 2 points on that. I mean, firstly, I'm not embarrassed about the retail price cap. I think it's protected consumers effectively, and that's something which we're very proud to maintain. In terms of security of gas, I couldn't agree with him more. He should be addressing his comments to other members in this House who want essentially to shut down the UK continental shelf. We had a North Sea transition deal precisely because we recognised that this is a transition that will take a number of years.
Leila Moran.
Deputy Speaker, the fact that another energy supplier has gone under is causing huge anxiety for constituents everywhere. And they'll be equally concerned that the process of the supplier of last resort in this case hasn't worked. Can he reassure them? How many other energy suppliers is he concerned about over this winter? How many customers would that represent? And if this process isn't working, is he considering a Northern Rock-style energy company to take on customers of companies that have gone under, given that it hasn't been working in this case?
So, as I maintained, there are two forms of remedy that we have in dealing with this sort of situation. First is a supply of last resort, and the second is a special administrative regime. In this particular instance, which is the subject of the urgent question, it was felt by Ofgem, not the government, by Ofgem, that the supplier of last resort mechanism was inappropriate, and so we're now looking, as I said in my statement, at the special administrative regime. But both of these structures are working.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This will be a really worrying time for bulk customers who won't only be concerned about the continuity of their supply, but also about the protection of the payments that they've already made. Very many of my constituents were with Avro. They've been in touch with me, and they're concerned about the payments that they made by direct debit and whether or not that's going to be translated into future payments. Would the Secretary of State be able to give them some reassurance on this matter that their payments have been protected and will be?
Secretary of State.
I've mentioned in my initial statement that consumer balances will in fact be protected throughout this process.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister keeps on saying that it's all working, but it doesn't feel like it's working, to be honest. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen such an example of government complacency at the dispatch box as bad as this. The truth of the matter is that millions of people are worrying about what their bills are going to be. There are businesses who are going to struggle, and we've had 22 companies go under. I mean, how on earth is that? Yes, it's all working perfectly. Would you please answer one simple question, which taxpayers will want to know, which is how much is the government bailout going to be in the end?
Secretary of State.
I'll answer the latter question. There is no government bailout. There is the poor, failing companies have not been bailed out, and I want to reiterate that. he will also know, if he knows anything about the energy market, he will know that over the last few years, 6 or 7 companies have exited the market, and they were dealt with a supplier of last resort. The stresses of this particular gas price situation, which I will remind honourable and right honourable members quadrupled in the last 6 months, meant that there was more pressure this year. But the system, the structure, the supply of last resort and the special administrative regime are working.
Philip Holloway.
Parliamentary constituency generates enough renewable energy from wind and solar to power all 45,000 local homes. And the constituency is one of the greenest in the whole country. If we're going to reduce our exposure to volatile international gas prices, isn't it crucial that we do more to diversify our source of supply?
Absolutely right. And that's exactly what my honourable friend will be happy to realise that we're doing through the 10-point plan. Commitments to offshore wind, commitments to solar power, commitments to nuclear power, commitments to other technologies. So absolutely, it's a huge imperative for us and for me as Secretary of State to ensure that we have a diversity of supply.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Bulb was the 7th largest energy supplier in the United Kingdom. How much bigger does a supplier have to be before it is too big to be allowed to fail? And what is this Secretary of State going to do, along with his Cabinet colleagues, to make sure that the cost of this market failure is not borne by ordinary families who are already struggling to pay their fuel bills this winter?
The honourable gentleman makes a point about Bulb. It was a very large company, and that's precisely why the supply of last resort in this instance wasn't felt to be an appropriate mechanism. And the solution, as chuntering from a sedentary position, is the special administrative regime, which I outlined, I hoped, very clearly in my initial statement.
Carl McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has made various references to nuclear power so far, and it's great to hear that there is a mix and a commitment to nuclear power. But could he inform the House how long is it since the latest round of commissioning of nuclear power stations, since the last nuclear power station was commissioned, and how many more are planned in the future?
Secretary of State.
Having been a close student of the Energy White Paper, as I'm sure my honourable friend is, he will know that we've had a commitment to one more investment in one more large-scale nuclear project before the end of the Parliament. He will also know that we have committed to small modular reactors. I was very pleased to go to Sheffield to make that announcement only last week. Nuclear is clearly a big part of our energy mix and will help us in the future.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker. The government's headlong rush to net zero is already showing through in people's fuel bills and on levels of fuel poverty in the United Kingdom. And despite what the Minister has said about licences to help through the transition period, we are still going to be reliant on for 50% of our gas from outside sources, which does not give us energy security, while at the same time we have enough gas under the ground in the UK that have us totally supplied for the whole country for 150 years. Which could help the levelling up agenda in the northwest of England and help my constituents who find themselves at the end of a very expensive pipeline at the moment and very vulnerable. Why is the government not prepared to exploit the resources which we have to deal with fuel poverty, to deal with fuel security and to help the levelling up agenda in poorer parts of England?
So I don't apologise for the net zero agenda. I think we saw made big strides at COP26. We could have gone further. That's an area which we're showing leadership, and I think it's something we should be proud of. On to, as you put it, exploiting gas resources. We looked at fracking. There were issues with respect to effects on the Richter scale, earthquakes, that sort of thing. People objected to that, and we imposed a moratorium on it. But I'm very happy to discuss with him this issue if he wishes.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK Government are responsible for families facing a cost of living crisis due to the triple whammy of rising gas prices, looming tax rises and cuts to universal credit. Thankfully, in Wales, our Labour Government are providing an additional one-off cash payment of £100 to vulnerable households to support them in paying their fuel bills this winter. This Government are more concerned with bailing out the energy companies like Bulb rather than supporting the most vulnerable. So will the Secretary of State do the right thing and follow Wales's lead in supporting those most vulnerable in fuel poverty?
So supporting the most vulnerable is exactly what we're doing through the warm home discount and an extension to it. That's exactly why we have maintained the energy price cap, and the companies have, many of them have protested against that, and we're always mindful to protect consumers and to protect the most vulnerable.
Alison Tulis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The FSB have found that 77% of Scottish businesses have seen an increase in their overheads since this time last year, and fuel costs make up a huge proportion of this. So could I ask him, what assessment has he made of the likelihood of these costs being passed on to consumers who are also paying higher prices at the tills because of inflation and Brexit?
In the context of, and the one word she didn't mention in her question was COVID. And in the consequence of COVID, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has put in £400 billion into the economy to support the very businesses that she's referring to, and many of those businesses in Scotland have been supported by them.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just since the budget, several companies have gone under. Will he inject some urgency into this matter and look again at the suggestion, now that the Treasury has the freedom to do so, to lift the VAT burden, both on households but also on small businesses, so that we could have an immediate lift that will happen in this country regardless of what's happening to global prices?
She will appreciate that matters to do with taxation, VAT, all of those things are subject to my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer's department policy. She will also know there is urgency. I speak to Ofgem all the time, every day. And we monitor the market extremely closely. We are looking at how the solar process is working. It's working reasonably well. And as I've said, we're looking at this special administration regime with respect to bulb.
Clive Effort.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is not happening in other countries. So, I mean, if this is evidence of the system working, I'd hate to see if it wasn't working. But the government has ruled out any bailout from the Treasury. Will he give the same undertaking that customers will not be forced to pay huge bills in order to pay for the government's failure of regulation?
So look, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to point out that the energy price cap, such as we have, does not occur in other countries. So consumers here are being protected, and many of the people who are actually bearing the brunt of this crisis are the very firms that, for whatever reason, have had to leave the market. The structure is working. It's protecting consumers, and companies which have fallen foul of these very high prices have been forced out of the market.
Thank you. We come now to the next urgent question, for which I call Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Minister make a statement on the future of transport for the North?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Transport for the North is a subnational transport body. Their statutory role, as set out in legislation, is to provide a strategic transport plan for the region and to provide advice to the Secretary of State. Since 2016, in addition to these statutory responsibilities, Transport for the North has co-cliented the development of Northern Powerhouse Rail alongside the Department for Transport. As this important programme moves into its next, more complex delivery stage, it is right that we have a single, clear line of accountability to the Secretary of State. This has been an important lesson learnt from the delivery of other major infrastructure projects. Therefore, Transport for the North will transition from co-client to co-sponsor, continuing to provide statutory advice and to input on the strategic direction of the programme. The details of this arrangement are currently being worked out between my department and Transport for the North. Madam Deputy Speaker, Transport for the North's advice was carefully considered alongside a range of other evidence when developing the Integrated Rail Plan. Any changes to Northern Powerhouse Rail delivery does not impact Transport for the North's statutory functions, nor the level of core funding it will receive this financial year to carry out those functions. Nor does it alter the Government's commitment to levelling up the North, or the fact that the Integrated Rail Plan commits £96 billion to improving rail infrastructure across the Midlands and the North, the largest single government investment in the history of British Railways.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Can I first of all thank Mr Speaker for granting this urgent question, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his response, but sadly I am far from reassured that cutting Transport for the North's responsibilities and funding are not just spiteful reprisals for TfN advocating strongly on behalf of the North for a new high-speed, fully electrified Northern Powerhouse rail and for the eastern leg of HS2. I thought there was broad consensus informed by Lord Heseltine's 2012 report that rail infrastructure investment is a central part of the levelling up agenda. Levelling up in turn was meant to be a central part of the government's strategy to increase overall UK economic growth. Treasury rules were meant to have been changed. The Prime Minister has repeatedly promised not one but two high-speed train lines, the eastern leg of HS2 that would have benefited the east of Leeds, including Hull, and Northern Powerhouse Rail. Now, regeneration of great cities such as Hull and Bradford will be held back for another 20 years at least, with poor connectivity, slow speeds and inadequate capacity for passengers and freight. So by removing Transport for the North's responsibility for developing Northern Powerhouse Rail, ministers reduce scrutiny and accountability and show no interest in working in partnership with the North. So much for devolution. So when challenged, ministers have decided to stop the criticism by gutting the powers of Transport for the North and centralising to Whitehall responsibility for rebranding the Transpennine route upgrade as Northern Powerhouse Rail. This government is taking back control to prevent levelling up. And by both myself and my honourable friend, the member for Bradford South, and many other MPs across the North want answers to the following questions. When did the Secretary of State decide that Transport for the North's advice on the integrated rail plan would be ignored and not provided with the full details and impact assessments of the integrated rail plan? What will be the fate of Transport for the North if it continues to advocate for a genuine Northern Powerhouse rail line? What implications do the changes to TfN have for the wider levelling up agenda and prospects for boosting UK GDP growth? And finally, how can the North now have a genuine say in its future?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Regrettably, my Right Honourable Lady's comments seem to stem from a confusion about what Transport for the North does. The last time the Right Honourable Lady and I debated Transport for the North's role in this chamber, she argued her inability to secure improvements to the toilets at Hull Station was why Transport for the North needed more money. I would therefore gently remind the Right Honourable Lady and members across this House that Transport for the North is not a delivery body, nor has it ever been. Their statutory function purely is to develop a strategic transport plan for the North, in the same way that Midlands Connect do for the Midlands. Transport for the North statutory role, therefore, remains unchanged. What has changed is that as we are now moving into project delivery, the Department of Transport will assume the role as the sole client for the Northern Powerhouse Rail programme, with responsibility for instructing both Network Rail and HS2 Limited. Establishing this single client answerable to the Secretary of State is consistent with Northern Powerhouse Rail delivery model that was endorsed by the Board of Transport for the North in January 2021. And we will take on board lessons learned from other major projects about the need for clear accountability. The Right Honourable Lady might want to stand in this chamber and talk about process and minor technical changes to delivery models, but I know what her constituents and mine, both in the north of England, would want this government to talk about, which is about getting on with delivering the changes people want to see. We are investing £96 billion in the railways of the Midlands and the North, the biggest ever investment the government has made in the rail network. It will slash journey times, double or in some cases even treble capacity, and crucially, it will do this all 10 to 15 years earlier than the original plans. So when her constituents in Hull start to see the doubling in the frequency of trains to Leeds, for example, they won't be worried about co-clienting or co-sponsoring. They will see a government that is getting on with the job of levelling up this country and delivering the transformational transport improvements that we were elected to do. Thank you.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I declare an interest, first of all, having been a member of the Transport for the North Board for a period of time and having been involved in setting up the subnational transport bodies. And I just confirm exactly what my honourable friend has just said. Transport for the North is not a delivery body. What my constituents want to see is more progress on the delivery of our rail improvements. We've seen huge progress on rolling stock changes in the north. Next month, we will see a doubling of the frequency of the service from Harrogate and Nesborough to York, thanks to the work of North Yorkshire County Council and Don Mackenzie in particular. So will my honourable friend just confirm that there will be a focus upon the delivery of the investment plans and accountability mechanisms for those charged with the delivery?
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the former Rail Minister himself, makes an important point. We have to ensure that there is clear accountability to ministers for delivery of these projects, in the same way that there is already clear accountability for projects being delivered through the Rail Network Enhancement Pipeline and other schemes across the country. So I completely endorse what he says. Transport for the North will remain an important partner for us to work with, and we look forward to receiving further advice from them, but the delivery model is best done with a sole client being the Department of Transport.
Jim Whitmore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How dare he stand there and talk down the right honourable member for her question? She knows exactly what it means for people in Hull and exactly what it means for people in the north of England. The funding that was promised has not been delivered. The powers that were promised to the north of England for our metro mayors, our council leaders and for people in the north to finally get control have been snatched away by this centralising government, and we know exactly what it means. So no patronising from the front bench of the government on that. We all know exactly what this is. We've seen it with the Electoral Commission. When they come up with an answer that the government don't like, they're attacked. When parliamentary standards come up with an answer the government don't like, they're attacked. And when Transport for the North comes up with a plan the government don't agree to, they're scrapped in all intents and purposes. Can I begin by asking the Secretary of State to point now to where the money will come from and where the plans will be developed for new transport projects, bearing in mind that the integrated rail plan is a plan for 29 years. If no new schemes come forward in that period, residents in Hull will see very little investment. Can I ask what the practical implications are for the staff? How many people who currently work for Transport for the North will be TUPI'd across to the new organisation? We know that this is a Whitehall power grab, and we also know what it will mean in practice. No new projects, just more spoken mirrors. Last week, the Transport Secretary said he was spending £96 billion in the north. That's not true. It's around half of that coming to the north of England, and that's over 29 years. What does that mean in practice, Madam Deputy Speaker? That it's actually £100 a person a year, when the transport spending gap between the north and London is £400 a year. That's not levelling up, and to be clear, we're not demanding that London gets levelled down. We're asking for the same. We want to know that this is not a centralising power grab, because if it is, we're not going to stand up for it. So what will the Minister do now, while he has a final chance to put the record straight, to convince us this is not about robbing people in the north of the investment that they deserve? This is not about a centralising Whitehall ministerial power grab, and promise finally that the 29-year plan won't be the last word on transport investment in the north of England, because if it is, the government would have failed again.
Minister.
Dear, oh dear, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is clear once again from what the Shadow Secretary of State has said that Labour want to stick to the outdated plans that would give the East Midlands and the North nothing for 10 years. Our plan delivers the same, similar or better journey times to almost everywhere, with 8 out of the top 10 busiest rail corridors in the North and the Midlands benefiting, and it starts delivering those improvements 10 years sooner. Labour want to focus solely on the biggest cities in the North, ignoring smaller towns and communities that link them. Under the original plans, which Labour are so determined to stick to, places on the existing lines such as Doncaster, Huddersfield, Wakefield and Leicester would have seen little improvement or even a worsening of their services. Our plan means that these great northern places will receive the infrastructure projects that they need to link them up with local, regional and national services that run alongside. In government, Labour failed to upgrade our railways. Our infrastructure tumbled down the world rankings. On top of that, the Leader of the Opposition can't even decide whether he supports HS2 or not. Labour don't have a plan to deliver for the Midlands and North. We do.
Paul Maynard.
Thank you very much. Can I thank the Minister for all the efforts I know he has put in during his time in the role into getting the very best package possible. I stood at that same dispatch box as he does now, promising the member for Hull on very many occasions that Northern Powerhouse Rail would go from Liverpool to Hull all the way. Can he set out how the integrated rail plan delivers that commitment I made within the time journey times that the Honourable Member for Hull anticipates, but also how much sooner will it now be delivered compared to if we had to build a second parallel rail line?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend and predecessor for his comments. As he will know, the Prime Minister was very clear, and in our manifesto we were clear that on Northern Powerhouse Rail we would commit to Northern Powerhouse Rail with an initial focus on the section between Manchester and Leeds. The Integrated Rail Plan actually expands that to initial focus between Liverpool and York. That is the core investment, but alongside that, many of the upgrades that are already being delivered as part of the rail network enhancement pipeline will continue. For example, upgrades to the Hope Valley line, improving journey times to Sheffield. But we will continue to obviously consider other investments in our rail infrastructure alongside that to deliver the transformational benefits that we all want to see to communities across the north of England.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The undermining of transport for the north is just the latest act in a pattern of centralisation in Whitehall, I think, emblematic of this administration. This government doesn't like transport policy being run by Holyrood, so they cobbled together a union connectivity review over its head, although it has to be said before the review is even published. The bridge over the biggest undersea munitions dump in Europe, the Prime Minister's pet project, has itself been dumped. This government doesn't like transport policy being run by the Mayor of London, so they're starving them of funding. Now this government doesn't like transport policy being criticised by Transport for the North, so they're slashing its funding and removing many of its responsibilities. So why does the Minister think this government knows better than the people and elected representatives of the north of England? Last week the Secretary of State said that a whole 75 staff from the DFT have moved to Leeds. When will the rest follow to the north so that the people at the top of the DFT truly understand the rundown and underinvested transport network they're responsible for? And will he guarantee that our devolved administrations will not be subjected to these attempted power grabs and undermining in future?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Of course, the honourable gentleman talks about devolution, and as he will know, now over 60% of the north is covered by mayoral combined authorities and metro mayors, thanks to the historic devolution settlement by this country. Indeed, it was this government that established Transport for the North itself. He also asks about DFT staff based in Leeds. I'm delighted that in the past year we have established a new Department for Transport office in Leeds. Last time I visited, there were 70 staff working there. I'm pleased to confirm that as of today that number has now gone above 100, and I look forward to visiting again to welcome even more staff in the months to come.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I take no lectures from the party opposite, who in 13 years in government didn't lay a single mile of electrification in my area, downgraded northern routes, ploughed money into the south and left northerners rattling around on decade-old pacer trains. So take no lectures from them. But can I say to him, we're very grateful to have received our Restoring Our Railways funding for the Brigg line, because if you miss the last train on a Saturday, you have to wait a week for the next one. So can he look very closely at the business case that's been submitted on that? Can he also agree to work with us on the Gould to Leeds line via the Town Deal funding? And can he tell us what will be the improvements to East Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire, to the Humber, from the Transpennine upgrades?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Quite a lot in that. I thank my honourable friend for his question. As he will be delighted to hear, I'm sure, the Restoring Your Railways announcement will be separate from the Integrated Rail Plan, so we have more announcements to come on that, along with the Rail Network Enhancement Pipeline will also be published separately. So the 96 billion is not the total of our investment in the north, it is just the core pipeline for the north of England. As my honourable friend will be pleased to hear, the investment in the Transpennine route upgrade will deliver a doubling in the number of services from Hull across into Leeds, amongst other benefits.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was promised many times an eastern leg of HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail in full with the city centre stop in Bradford. Now we hear the government has in effect dismantled Transport for the North by removing its powers and its staff. Whilst a late-night letter from his department was sent to TFN last night, this does not change the fact that this government's approach was not approved by Transport for the North. No. Show us the minutes, Minister. What we have seen is a mishmash of broken promises and silencing of its critics. Just how can the North have a say in its own future? And can he define exactly what is a co-sponsor and what are its powers?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. First of all, it's very important to say that we are certainly not abandoning Transport for the North staff. We thank them all for the work that they have put into developing options for Northern Powerhouse Rail, and the TUPE discussions are ongoing, so we can hope those staff can join the growing number of Department for Transport staff based in the north of England. This government remain committed to HS2 and remain committed to Northern Powerhouse Rail, and this plan that we set out last week explains how we will deliver the benefits to communities across the north sooner than ever expected.
Kevin Hollenrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are some excellent measures in the integrated rail plan that will be transformational for this economy, for our economy right across the country. I think in the plan there's some money set aside, I think £100 million, to look at the feasibility of other measures. Would he consider asking Transport for the North to look at an improved direct connection between Bradford and Manchester, which currently takes around an hour to travel that 40-mile journey, but again would be transformational for Bradford and Manchester and something for right across the north?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The £100 million announced in the Integrated Rail Plan is specifically to look at how we can get HS2 trains most effectively from East Midlands Parkway to Leeds. So that means we haven't ruled out the construction of the full eastern leg at this stage. We are looking at whether that is the best long-term solution. In terms of Bradford, my honourable friend, the member for Shipley, and my honourable friend, the member for Keighley, continue to remind me the importance of Bradford, and of course I am just over the border from the Bradford district, so we are very keen to see what we can do to support Bradford. I myself spoke to the leader of Bradford Council the day after the publication of the Integrated Rail Plan. We are keen to continue working with Bradford and local stakeholders to deliver benefits to that area.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've followed on from the Minister's words about Bradford. Bradford is angry. The whole city is angry. My constituents are angry. 530,000 people have been failed. Whilst I welcome the intervention to focus on Bradford, I really do, the truth is that this government has stripped the idea of £30 billion worth of growth for the next 10 years. And that's fourth youngest city in the country, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I also hear on the grapevine that the government has held on to the IPOSs for Leeds because there might be a U-turn. So my question is simple. When will he U-turn on the NPR?
Minister.
The honourable lady asked when I will U-turn. We do not intend to U-turn for all the reasons set out in the Integrated Rail Plan, to spend billions of pounds investing in the existing rail route from Manchester to Leeds, and then to spend £18 billion more building a brand new line just simply did not make economic sense. We will reduce the journey times. We will reduce the journey times from Bradford into Leeds from the current about 20 minutes down to 11 minutes, and we will continue to work with regional stakeholders to deliver benefits.
Philip Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents are not interested in quangos, but they are very interested in actual transport infrastructure. The Minister knows how unhappy and disappointed I was with the announcement regarding Bradford and the scaling back of Northern Powerhouse Rail and the lack of a station stop in the centre of Bradford, and I hope even at this late stage the government will think again about that. But can I ask him, given the huge disappointment to Bradford from that announcement, can I ask him to go away and think about what additional transport infrastructure the Bradford district could have delivered to it? And can I urge him to start with the Shipley Eastern Bypass?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend who continues to be a doughty champion for Shipley. As he will know, alongside the £92 billion announced in the Integrated Rail Plan, we are spending over £7 billion on road investments and over £5 billion on buses and cycling initiatives, and I'm sure his campaign for his bypass is heard by my other ministers in the department.
Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Integrated Rail Plan gives nothing to the North East at all. It will create economic imbalances right across the North, giving us all less and at a later date. If the government was so confident of their position, there would have been ministerial presence at this morning's meeting of Transport for the North. Instead, it seems TFN is now meeting the same fate as anyone else who dares to speak the truth about this government. Can he please confirm today what exact powers he is grabbing for Transport from the North and how many people are set to lose their jobs?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. No one is set to lose their jobs, and the statutory functions of Transport for the North are not changing, and this plan delivers significant benefits to the North East of England.
Carl Mackay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend the Minister will know that I'm a strong proponent of better transport links and infrastructure for Lincoln, my constituency. And so I make a plea to him, whether it is Transport for the North, whether it's Midlands Connect or any other organisation that's either strategic or is involved in delivery. Could Lincoln figure more than just occasionally on a map, please?
My honourable friend continues to make a passionate case for Lincoln, as he will know many of the investments that he has campaigned so strongly for are the responsibility of other ministers in the Department of Transport, but I am sure they have once again heard his pitch for Lincoln.
Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the Minister that there is no evidence that the Department for Transport can deliver on time, deliver on cost? So why has this change taken place in terms of the delivery mechanism? But can he also make it very clear to the House that the cutbacks we saw last week are going to have a serious impact on the economy across the whole of the north of England? Rochdale wants to trade with Hull, with Newcastle, with Sheffield. The government's plan would not allow that to take place.
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman asks about the change from co-clienting to co-sponsorship. As he will know, Crossrail, which is still yet to open, was a project which was co-cliented, and one of the major lessons we've learnt from that project being massively over budget and delayed is that co-clienting doesn't work on major infrastructure projects. There needs to be clear lines of accountability to the Secretary of State for Transport. He needs to be the solely responsible for these projects to Parliament, to the National Audit Office, to the Public Accounts Committee and others, and that is why we are going for a sole clienting model. It is one of the lessons we have learnt from the Crossrail debacle.
Philip Holloway.
The improved connectivity from Kettering railway station to the north as a result of government investment in our railways. We've recently had our twice-an-hour service to and from the north reinstated after it was taken away by the Labour government in 2010. And can my honourable friend confirm that the connectivity from Kettering to and from the north will be further improved with the complete electrification of the Midland Main Line?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. Kettering is one of many parts of the country that will benefit much earlier and more significantly from the plans that we announced last week than on the previous plans. He continues to champion further improvements in his constituency. I'm keen to continue working with him to ensure we deliver those benefits, such as the Midland Main Line electrification, as early as possible.
Chion Moore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's quite simple, isn't it? The government is slashing Transport for the North because it is slashing Transport for the North, abandoning the much promised ambitions for an integrated transport infrastructure that our economy needs. So will the Minister tell me who will set out the plans for our northern transport future, or do we not have one?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, last week the Shadow Secretary of State described $96 billion, the biggest investment in our railways, as crumbs from the table. I think we need to focus on what we are delivering, not the amount of money that we are putting in. We will continue to work with Transport for the North as the statutory transport body in the North, advising on our plans, and we look forward to continuing to have a positive relationship with them.
Catherine Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Way back in 2016, when I was thinner and probably younger looking, I helped a young man by the name of George Osborne set the Northern Powerhouse Partnership up. Exactly. And as part of that, I actually worked with Transport for the North in their Manchester Piccadilly offices. And I have to tell the House, I found them partisan, specious and entirely obsessed with Labour Party politics. Does the Minister agree with me that actually what's happening here today is the Labour Party finally realising that they don't control the whole of the north of England and there's more than one way of getting something done?
Well, I am delighted to see my honourable friend in this House, alongside many other Conservative MPs elected in 2019. I'm surrounded by far more Conservative MPs in the north of England than I used to be when I was first elected in 2010, and it is a real pleasure because people like my honourable friend bring real expertise to this House. We want to work with Transport for the North in the same way that we work with Midlands Connect and other subnational transport bodies across the UK. But as we move into delivering the benefits of these investments sooner, we need to have the Department of Transport as the sole client delivering these projects.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In February 2020, I asked the Prime Minister about this issue and he told me, and I quote, "We will make sure that Hull is fully part of our vision for a high-speed north." So why were Transport for the North's strong recommendations for electrification for the Hull to Selby line then completely ignored?
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, no one's advice was ignored. For 20 months after we launched the Integrated Rail Plan following the Oka review in February last year, we have taken a range of evidence from the National Infrastructure Commission, from Transport for the North, from Midlands Connect, from stakeholders across the region. And as we've worked through those plans, we have been clear that we will deliver benefits to people across the north of England sooner than the original plans. And I think the £96 billion we have announced, a historic investment in railways across the Midlands and the North, is something that we can all be proud of.
Paul Hull.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just when it comes to the discussions around this, I don't think it's helpful that we get the Northern Powerhouse Partnership Chairman out on the TV claiming that things are not going to happen, that were never even going to happen under Northern Powerhouse Rail. So the misleading words that are going on are no use to this debate at all. When we talk about the North, one of the big things that is a concern to us is the Leamside line and the things that should happen with that. It does get a mention in the IRP in terms of the fact that it could be done through a different mechanism. Would the Minister meet with me just to discuss that further and work out how best we can continue to progress the Leamside line? Thank you.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm more than happy to meet with my honourable friend. He continues to make a passionate case for the Leamside line. I'm happy to work with him and local stakeholders to see what we can do.
Order. Can I just make it clear to those who are gesturing while they're sitting down that I have called to ask questions several people who were not here at the very beginning of the Minister's statement. I should explain to the Chamber that I've been very lenient today because I was aware that the monitor was not changed until several... No, the Honourable Gentleman mustn't dissent from what I'm saying as a very simple explanation as to why I'm being kind and considerate to the Chamber. I could stop and say the moment the Minister gets to his feet, anyone who is not in the Chamber at that moment is not allowed to utter a word. But in my judgment, that would mean that the Minister would not be properly questioned nor the government held to account on this important matter. And on this occasion, the monitor was not changed. This part of business started early. several people were taking part in an important event with Mr. Speaker downstairs. I have therefore been lenient because I think it's more important to come down when there's a matter of judgment on the side of giving colleagues the opportunity to ask their questions and to hold the government to account. And that is my judgment, and that's why I have done it, and it ought not to be questioned. Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm just interested to know whether the government, both today and last week when they were talking about the scrapping of the eastern leg of HS2, have talked a lot about improving journey times, but we all know that one of the reasons for doing HS2 and the Northern Powerhouse Rail was above all to improve connectivity and capacity. Now, can the Minister explain how the new integrated rail plan and today's announcement about Transport for the North, how it's going to increase capacity and connectivity, and will it reduce fares in order to encourage more people to stop using their cars and to get onto the trains?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. As set out in the Integrated Rail Plan, on many of these key routes we are doubling or trebling capacity, and I would also be clear on the eastern leg. We have committed and funded through the Integrated Rail Plan to build a first phase from the West Midlands to the East Midlands. There is now £100 million for further work to look at the best way to get HS2 trains from there through to Leeds. For the time being, therefore, the plans to build the full eastern leg remain as they are. No safeguarding has been lifted. That is something that will be only changed after we have the outcome of the study.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a big supporter of HS2, I have to admit I was very disappointed about the news of the eastern leg going up to Yorkshire. Obviously disappointed as well that the Leader of the Opposition had campaigned against it so vigorously. But can the Minister please confirm there is lots of good news for my constituents in the Integrated Rail Plan who use Huddersfield Station, Slough Station and Marsden Station on the Trans-Pennine route. I thank the Minister for visiting Marsden last year with local rail campaigners, and can he confirm that we can get investment in the disabled access at Marsden railway station as well, please?
Minister.
So my honourable friend is completely right what he says about the Leader of the Opposition. Of course, the Leader of the Opposition has opposed HS2 consistently over the years and said its impact on the country would be devastating. And even in 2019, he was still calling for the project to be cancelled. I'm happy to confirm, as part of the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, every single station in my honourable friend's constituency will see massive investment, including making all of them fully accessible to disabled passengers.
Rachel Master.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reason why Transport for the North has rail and political leadership on is to join up the local economies of the North with the transport system, and that is what the Northern Powerhouse Rail project was all about. Cutting the project means that we're going to lose connectivity, capacity, but also see major disruption on the route. The Board of Transport for the North has met this morning to try and find a way forward with the Integrated Rail Plan and their proposals. Will the Minister ensure that he meets with the Board and finds a way forward?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I spoke to Martin Tugwell, the Chief Executive of Transport for the North, the day before the Integrated Rail Plan came out. I continue to have regular conversations with Transport for the North, and we are determined to work closely with Transport for the North as their role moves from co-client of the Northern Powerhouse Rail project to co-sponsor.
Debbie Abrams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Unfortunately, the eradication of Northern Powerhouse Rail will have a detrimental effect on my constituents who use Greenfield Station. And following on from my honourable friend's question about the board meeting, the Transport for North board meeting today, I believe they have put out a statement stating that they are proposing a process of mediation which would involve investigating potential local financial contributions to get the much needed new line via Bradford. So will the Minister meet with the leaders of the North to discuss this?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The day of the Integrated Rail Plan being announced to this House last Thursday, I met with many board members of Transport for the North to discuss the plans. We are keen to continue to work with members of the Board of Transport for the North and Transport for the North itself, though it is important to say the Integrated Rail Plan process has now concluded, as has the spending review. So if local funding is brought forward, we will certainly look at that. But in terms of the government's plan, the plan has now been published.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week's announcement, a centralised decision from the Department of Transport, effectively not merely scrapped the high-speed line from Sheffield to London, it scrapped the high-speed line from Leeds to Sheffield, from Sheffield to Birmingham and from Sheffield to Manchester. Is it the case that because Transport for the North disagreed with those decisions, what the Minister has effectively done is to switch Transport for the North onto Zoom? He can sit in his office, he can see that they're there, but with a mute button on in future, he doesn't have to listen to their advice.
Minister.
Transport for the North, Madam Deputy Speaker, has never been a delivery body. It isn't a delivery body. It's not becoming a delivery body. Honourable members opposite seem to get hot under the collar about these technicalities, when in actual fact we are getting on with electrification. The Midland Main Line electrification will deliver significant benefits sooner than anticipated. And may I just gently remind the opposition that, of course, under the 13 years of the last Labour government, they only managed to electrify 63 miles compared to the 1,100 miles already electrified under this government.
Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister will be aware that a lot of the north is further north than York. In the North East, there is consensus, political consensus, in Sport from Business and from Transport for the North for reopening of the Leamside line to get extra capacity on the East Coast main line, which is needed. That is clearly being ignored. Could the honourable gentleman tell me where that lies? Or is it going to just be shelved and forgotten about? And can I urge him to stop trying to con people in the north in giving pots of money out to fantasy projects such as, for example, the railway line up to Concert, which is going to cost £640 million. I'd rather have the money concentrated and spent on transport rather than just backing consultants.
Minister.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his point. He again makes a compelling case for the Leamside line, which many colleagues across this House do, and many of the regional stakeholders